All right, hello, welcome everyone. We're going to wait a few minutes for some more people to join, but thank you all for attending today. This is our webinar on Title VI Civil Rights Compliance, hosted by Whit O'Briens. And we're so happy to have everyone here joining us today. This is part of a series of webinars that we're hosting with Whit O'Briens throughout the month of March. So this first one on Title VI Civil Rights Compliance is going to be followed by a series of 3 webinars focused on the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act, and all of those different new federal funding sources and all the different rules and regulations with those. Very relevant for lots of state, local governments, as well as other partner agencies and organizations. So we hope that you'll attend those future sessions as well. And now to get things started, I see a few more people joining, but we are going to get things kicked off with a series of poll questions. So I think we'll bring up the poll questions now. And just to sort of understand the audience here, if you could just, again, answer these questions so we know where everyone is coming from, what types of organizations you're representing, so we can kind of better gear our presentation to suit your background and experience. So please answer those. And we do have a chat function here. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please enter them in the chat. And we do have plenty of time saved at the end of the presentation to answer all of those questions. So please feel free to fill out questions there. And how are we doing on the poll questions?
Doing good. I think we'll give you another 30 seconds to populate them.
All right, hopefully everyone's had a chance to answer the poll questions. And I think now we can show the results for those. All right, great. So we have a mix of experience here, mix of geography, a lot of people from representing all parts of the state, lots of different organizations represented here as well, and sort of a mix of experience with developing equity strategies. So about less than half are in the process of developing one. That's great to see. And a number of people are also in the process of developing a Title VI compliance plan, but a mix there as well. And lots of different challenges that we're seeing: limited staff capacity, lack of knowledge in complying with Title VI civil rights compliance. So thank you for answering those poll questions. And I think with that, we'll get started with our presentation. So I'd like to welcome again, everyone. My name is Amy Miller. I'm the Federal Grant Administrator with the State Clearinghouse at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And we're going to start things off by talking about some of the federal grant resources that are available through our office. And so you can find all this information on the OPR website at opr.ca.gov. Under the tab for CEQA and federal grants, you'll select the button for federal assistance. And selecting that will take you here to this page. And I want to highlight these 3 different buttons here to go to on the page. First is going to be the applying for federal grants. And then we're going to talk about federal grant resources, followed by the federal grant email list. Next slide. So when you click on that applying for federal grants, that'll take you here to the Intergovernmental Review of Federal Programs page, which complies with the Executive Order, or EO 12372 process. This executive order allows for state and local elected officials to review and provide comment on eligible federal grant applications that have been submitted within their jurisdictions. And so for all grants subject to the EO, the applicants are required to submit their notice through this online system, and all registered elected officials receive those notices and are able to provide comments. Anyone from the public can view these notices through the submissions tab here on this website, which also allows filtering by area of interest. Next slide. And next, the OPR Federal Grant Resources page has a wealth of information to help you if you're just getting started in federal grants or if you're more experienced. There's lots of information here. And most importantly, this is where the slides and recordings and other materials from today's webinar will be posted under the heading OPR Trainings. So remember this page. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about is our federal grant email list called the Federal Grant Updates. And this is a weekly newsletter showing the latest in federal funding news, recently posted grant opportunities, and training events, highlighting the ones that are free or low cost. So this is a really great resource you won't find anywhere else. And I'll be sure to include the link for signing up in the chat, so you can all sign up for that today. And so with that, I'd like to close. Here is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have about this webinar, future webinars, or any resources about federal grants that you'd like more information on. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to our presenters. Before I do so, I'd like to share a quick disclaimer that the following information does not necessarily represent the views of OPR, but is provided here as a service to the grants community. And so with that, I'll turn things over to Mitzi from Witt O'Brien's. Thank you, Mitzi.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks on behalf of Witt O'Brien's for including us in these trainings. Today, I want to welcome everyone. Today, we've got a packed agenda. This is a full slide deck. So I want to just start by saying Title VI compliance is an in-depth and nuanced topic area. So our goal today is to go through various aspects of what Title VI means. It will have time for question and answer. We have just the hour, so our thought was to hold the questions until the end of the presentation, where we've, as Amy, as you'd said, we have that time set aside to either put the questions in the chat and or raise your hand. So I wanted to start by talking about, if you could next slide, please, Kayla, that I wanted to talk a little bit about who we are. My name's Mitzi McMahon. I'm a grants management professional with 25 years of public sector experience in program planning, management, and compliance. I've worked for a federal agency that administered grant funding, and I've worked for agencies that have received federal funding. So I've done both. And leaning on my experience as a civil rights compliance manager, I lead Title VI technical assistance at Witt O'Brien's. With me today is my colleague, Demetra, who will be addressing several areas of this session. Demetra?
Hi, I'm Demetra. I provide policy research and grant writing assistance to clients across the country. I support Title VI efforts at Witt O'Brien with an emphasis on language access planning.
Okay, so our agenda, we've got some things to cover. We'll do an overview of Title VI, what makes up a Title VI plan, and really how to get ready for funding opportunities, making sure your Title VI ready. So to get started on our Title VI overview, it's important to look at what Title VI says. No person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, or be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So while the original Title VI law only prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin, statutes have been passed since 1964. So you want to make sure your organization is inclusive. For instance, the Federal Highway Administration's Title VI program incorporates related statutes that have passed since 1964, and therefore prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, and disability. I want to stop here for a moment to note that many of our references today will be for the United States Department of Transportation. These references have been added because they're really blazing the trail with useful resources, some of which we'll share later on. So while it might be USD focused in some regards, the educational materials are and examples are definitely very useful. So next slide. And when I think about Title VI in action, I think for any entity receiving federal funding, there's a need to ensure your organization seeks out feedback and input from community members, including people with limited English proficiency. You should consider how your programs and projects impact historically underserved communities. And you need to document how you ensure non-discrimination at your organization as it relates to your programs and services. I want to pause and point out that this is separate from equal employment opportunity, Title VII. So Title VI and Title VII are not one and the same. Overall, you want to look to create a Title VI positive culture and educate your employees. When does Title VI apply? It's a really good question. Title VI is likely more far-reaching than you may have considered. If you receive federal financial assistance as a direct recipient or as a subrecipient, your programs and activities need to consider and comply with Title VI. How do you ensure compliance? Anyone that's been through an audit knows you need to have written policies and procedures that are in alignment with the federal requirements. Many requirements will evolve. The Biden administration has stated that it's reinvigorating Title VI efforts. Title VI is not new, but now there will be an increasing emphasis. I've included here a definition that your organization might want to assess when it's determining the scope of Title VI responsibilities. Program or activity. This means all the operations, any part of which is extended federal financial assistance. So for example, even if you receive Federal Highway Administration funding, Title VI doesn't just apply to the projects it funds. It applies to your organization's programs and services, and it applies to subrecipients. So all of that being said, we'll get into a little bit of the components of your Title VI plan. I will say this over and over, and I don't mind repeating myself. You want to know your federal funding sources. It's really important. And also important is to have a Title VI role. What do I mean by this? You want to be sure to have a list of your organization's federal funding sources. Like I said, I will repeat this often throughout this presentation. You want to look to your funders for specific guidance and requirements. For instance, Federal Highways requires that a Title VI coordinator be designated and have easy access to the head of the agency. Not all federal funders get that specific, but in this instance, I wanted to point out that is quite specific. So if you're a subrecipient, you can look to the agency that passes through federal funding to your organization for guidance. To help with this work and as part of your data collection, designate someone to be responsible for the implementation and compliance across your organization. And if applicable, subrecipients. Make sure this person has access to the lead decision maker in the organization. And you want to be sure to document some more. That is always crucial in sharing information and being prepared as an organization. So the prior slide helps to set the stage for getting your organization prepared, being informed and having someone to help oversee Title VI requirements is going to be instrumental in ensuring your efforts are documented. In a little bit more detail, we'll be discussing data collection, notices of rights and complaints, language access for limited English proficiency, public participation, employee and subrecipient training. Auditors love policies and procedures, so make sure you have these efforts documented. Okay, for data collection, you'll want to gather accurate and timely demographic data. My advice for getting started is to look for existing data that you may already have. Just start talking to the people in your organization if you don't already do so. You'll find that they can be a wealth of information, and they're already doing some of these elements. Demographic data should help describe the community you serve. So collect data that captures who makes up your community: race, color, national origin, income, languages spoken, etc. Collect data throughout your process. If you see struggles or opportunities along the way, use this to help inform your planning process. Okay, I think this is a very easy requirement to fulfill. You want to ensure the public is aware of their rights. And how do you do this? You can post notices of rights signage. You'll want to do this where the public interacts with your organization, on your website, any other place you may be able to share. You'll see this example here is LA Metro. It's their notice of civil rights. And it provides information. I know that's small, but at the end of the day, it does provide information in multiple languages. And this is to ensure equitable access. It also includes instructions on how to file a complaint. And it's a little bit longer than will fit on the page, but it's very detailed and has all of that information. Your organization has discretion how it wants to handle its complaint process. You can include ADA, Title VI, etc. in a combined process. The critical thing is just to make sure you meet the federal requirements and have clear policies and procedures, so your staff and the public know how to lodge a concern or a complaint. And that leads to our complaint procedures. So for your complaint procedures, you should define these and make the process readily available. Have a written procedure for filing your complaints, for investigating your complaints, and a complaint form. You want to post these and make sure they're translated in the top languages used in your community. Consider formats for members that might not have technology access or that are low literacy. I will make one note. As someone that was being audited by a federal funder, the federal agency wanted to see that our Title VI information was 2 clicks from the home page, but it just will depend on your funder. So it's nurturing those relationships and information. It's going to be critical for you. And for subrecipients, relying on your pass-through entities to assist. So I'm going to turn it over to Demetra, who'll discuss limited English proficiency and public participation.
Thank you, Mitzi. A language access plan is a document that outlines how to provide services to those whose primary language isn't English and who have a limited ability to speak, read, write, or understand English. No 2 language access plans will be the same because no 2 communities are the same. Tailor it based on your community's demographics and the types of services you provide. You'll also want to cover a variety of topics, such as a needs assessment, including what languages are spoken and by how many people, and ways to access limited English proficiency populations. This plan should evolve over time and as you get feedback from the public about what's working and what's not. Failure to provide language assistance may result in national origin discrimination. This graphic is from a recent US DOT guide on public participation tactics, and we find it incredibly useful. The link to the report is included on the next slide. But one thing we'd add to this process is that you need to be able to explain your projects to the public in ways that everyone will understand, because they can't meaningfully participate if they don't understand the technical aspects of the project. Be sure to have a public participation plan that demonstrates a commitment to meaningful public participation. Compile diverse outreach tools and inclusive communication strategies so everyone in your organization has the tools they need to facilitate public participation. Cultivate relationships with community-based organizations. They can be more closely tied to the community than government organizations, especially when it comes to underserved communities. Based on the registration list for this session, there are a few community-based organizations on this call that are primarily dedicated to encouraging civic engagement among underserved communities. Engage with community organizations where you can, because they're a wealth of information and likely already understand the barriers that prevent the community from participating. Analyze how programs and activities will impact the community and give them opportunities for input. You want to ensure that diverse views are considered at all stages of the process, including decision-making. But it's important to be honest about how public input will be incorporated. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. You'll lose trust with the community. Go into the public engagement process knowing how public input can actually impact the project and communicate that upfront to set expectations. At the end of the project, let the community know how you use their input. And finally, leverage a wide variety of communication channels. These can include social media, community-based organizations, mailers, and more. Stick with the methods that work best for the community you're serving. And I'll toss it back to Mitzi.
Thanks, Demetra. What a great example to lean into what your organization is already doing. That's another example, engagement. I'm going to talk about employee and subrecipient training next. Your organization will want to use training to develop awareness and responsibility of your federally funded programs. You want to make sure everyone is working together. This includes your staff and your subrecipients, if that is applicable. Be sure to educate staff about requirements and tools such as language assistance. I'll share a personal story, and as the person who ended up being responsible for writing the Title VI program for our agency, let this not be lost on you, the irony here. I was a new member of a transit agency. I was doing grant administration. I volunteered as part of a street team. We would go out and share information to travelers about this was about an upcoming station change. I wasn't given information about the language line. And of course, my high school and college Spanish was not quite enough. It wasn't sufficient, but I made do. We worked it out. It was a learning moment. It was a learning moment for me and the agency, and we ended up doing a much better job, a more robust job in sharing the tools so that staff was best able to help provide equitable access. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. Other things that you can do, aside from making sure everyone's up to speed on everything you have available in terms of your monitoring, compliance, and maintenance, you can host Title VI trainings. Be sure that those that monitor subrecipients are well educated. A sometimes overlooked opportunity is to provide training as part of your employee onboarding process. This is definitely a good opportunity to spread the word about what's required and how your staff can help with your overall compliance. So also, like I said, there's a lot to this. So I'm trying to break this down into segments for you. So when you're doing your Title VI planning, you also need to consider other things. So to start, your board representation. This is a component of data collection. The inclusion of minorities on planning boards and commissions is critical in establishing an equal access planning system. That's why you're doing it. You want to make sure you're recruiting diverse and representational board and committee members. I will let you know that some federal agencies will require documentation of the makeup of these boards and committees. And I've had to provide a narrative of what techniques my agency used to do those recruitments. So we've talked about Title VI, so I want to take a moment to discuss environmental justice. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. I think it's useful to talk about the connection. Environmental justice and Title VI are both rooted in the same basic principle. That no person should bear an unfair share of harm on account of their race, color, or national origin. Title VI requires recipients of federal funding to ensure their programs and services operate in a non-discriminatory manner. And the central tenet of environmental justice is that programs benefiting a community as a whole do not disproportionately allocate their adverse environmental and health burdens. This flows directly from the underlying principle of Title VI. Now, I want to talk a little bit about compliance and monitoring. It's really important to remember that a plan that sits on a shelf isn't useful for the community you serve. It's definitely not useful when you have an audit. Again, training and documentation is going to be key. Also, I will say know your federal funding agency specifics. Drill down to make sure you understand the specific federal funder requirements. Some may call for a Title VI plan, some may call it a Title VI program, or others may just require elements such as a language access plan and other aspects. Some may require reporting of complaints more frequently than during a 3-year review. Some may require reporting immediately. So it's just to educate yourself and know what you're dealing with to help best inform your path with compliance. Now, being Title VI ready helps to pave the way for funding. And an effective Title VI plan can help you win competitive funding. Civil rights is the foundation for your equity strategy. Your organization's equity strategy needs to include Title VI. A Title VI plan and an overall equity strategy will solidify and inform your planning and funding strategy. The administration's Justice 40 initiative aims to direct 40% of the benefits to disadvantaged communities. The incoming federal infrastructure awards will go to jurisdictions that can demonstrate commitment to equity and environmental justice. Now, considering environmental justice, this slide includes useful links to review as you're building out your funding strategy, so you're grant ready. Applications for many federal grants will be more competitive if they contribute to environmental justice for those communities that disproportionately experience climate change impacts, and again, target at least 40% of resources and benefits towards low-income, historically disadvantaged, underserved, or overburdened communities. U.S. Department of Transportation notice of funding opportunity, like many others, was very specific. The department sought to award, and that's the U.S. Department of Transportation, sought to award projects that address environmental justice. I'll pause here to emphasize that this is the time to build your equity strategy. The notice of funding clearly stated that projects that didn't sufficiently consider climate change and environmental justice in their planning must do so prior to receiving funds. The SMART grant and other bipartisan infrastructure law opportunities are open to more applicants than ever before, some of which likely have never received direct federal funding. It's important to note that there are multiple years of funding under the bipartisan infrastructure law. For SMART and many other programs, there will be additional years of notices of funding opportunities. So build your equity strategy and make sure you are grant ready and you have your compliance in place. Okay, federal agencies have drafted equity action plans, have been required to draft these. I recommend reviewing these and any other associated guidance for updates and ideas. This is an excerpt from U.S. Department of Transportation's Equity Action Plan, and it's highlighting key actions. These actions include reinvigorating programmatic enforcement of Title VI, issuing guidance for funding recipients to meet the requirements of meaningful public participation under Title VI, and last but not least, this one is establishing monitoring of funding recipient compliance. So as someone who has been on the federal side and as a recipient of federal funding, this to me is just that you get the funding, and there are these aspects that they're staffing up, they're reinvigorating, they're going to be monitoring for this. So they're going to educate recipients and then they will be monitored. So that is definitely something to note. The link is included there, so you can go and look. Once you have a list of your federal funding sources, you can go and see what's in store in that regard. Next slide. So all of this talk about compliance, but I wanted to share the impacts of non-compliance. So ensuring your organization is compliant is definitely critical to your success in continuing to be able to receive federal funding for all of the programs, services, and activities that you provide. Pulled from the headlines is a Title VI complaint that was filed against the Texas Department of Transportation. The issue was ongoing discrimination against Houston residents that were adversely affected by a proposed highway improvement project. It was asserted that the Texas DOT continued to discriminate on the basis of race, color, and national origin, even after the Federal Highway Administration initiated a Title VI investigation. It was also asserted that the Texas DOT retaliated against persons and groups that had previously filed by threatening to remove funding from the region altogether if Texas DOT wasn't allowed to construct its preferred version of the highway project. So, this just goes to show that, there are requirements, there are reasons to make sure you're compliant. And this is just an example of probably one of the worst case scenarios, in the process, but it's why there are complaint processes. And this is, no one wants to be in the news like that. So we've covered a lot of ground. It's important to reflect. I think that you just need to get started. Review your existing policies, your procedures and practices. You may not have them written down, but it could very well be that these things are already happening around you. Take stock of what you have in place. You're likely collecting data, engaging with the public, providing language access. Perhaps you have a complaint process. Just work with your team, professional organizations, industry leaders, and your federal partners. As someone who has worked at a federal agency and someone who has had to work with federal partners, and even as a subrecipient, I find that those relationships are really important. And the federal regulators are people. And, working towards that trust and building the partnerships is always critical. And as a person that handled grant administration in Washington, I will tell you, I still work very closely with colleagues. We would all band together and work and help collaborate on issues, such as when I needed to do a subrecipient monitoring plan for my agency. They took on their first subrecipient ever, and I devised a plan. I worked with my colleagues at another agency and we worked on it together. So, look around, see what you have. For the subrecipients that are on the call, you have resources. You have your pass-through agencies. For people that are direct recipients, you have your federal partners. You've got information that's available. This training is a good start. But look inward, ask the questions, and like I said, just get started. Well, the next slide is by no means inclusive of everything you need to know. We put together just a few resources for your information and further reading. There's so much on this topic, but again, starting with your federal funding agencies, collecting your staff and building a plan is where to start. And I will note that after this training, staff will be sharing a Title VI assessment that we have. It's a great starting point for your organization. And if you already have Title VI planning underway, it's a nice checklist that you can use. And this will be sent to participants via email, and it will also be on the OPR website. So with that, we have plenty of time as planned for questions and answers. And I don't see anything in the chat yet, but anyone that registered for this session was able to submit questions. So while we queue those up, or before we open up the microphones, I'd like to just take a second to go through some of the questions that were submitted as part of the registration process. So someone had asked about participants with autism and how to give reliable referrals. for services. And this is something that I would advise is going to fall under ADA. So while we've talked about Title VI, this is a good time that you're gathering your staff at your organization to talk about what you have in place, what your plans, what your documentation is, and to say who handles ADA inquiries at our organization. Someone asked how regulations apply to tiny startup manufacturers, creating laboratories and or pilot plants. And I will say, again, look to your federal funders. You want to look at your agreements with the funding agency or the pass-through agency to see what the project is that's funded and what the rules and requirements are around that funding. I always like to include, and I know some organizations are small, either the grants staff or your finance people. Just get people talking in the room to make sure everyone is understanding of your requirements, especially when you take on new grant funding. I am a big proponent of having a kickoff meeting and making sure that Title VI is a part of that, along with every other requirement is a good start. Let's see. I love this question. I'm not going to say who asked it, but I loved all the questions, but this one I have sat in this chair and wondered this as well. What department at a government agency should complete the Title VI Civil Rights Plan and compliance? That's an almost impossible one to answer, but I want to talk about this a little bit. What I've done in the past, being when I was public sector, and the advice I can give is that the slide where I said, gather your resources, talk to one another. Who should be responsible? That's a great question. Remember the slide about designating a role. Someone needs to be paying attention so that your organization can be compliant. So it's going back to the starting point on who's handling what, knowing your funding right off the bat. If you're getting federal highway funding, remember the slide that you have to designate a specific title for someone, but just get your organization talking about it, getting the right people at the table. If you're an organization that has multiple departments that you're following, maybe you're following your grant organization model is more, each department's going to handle each grant and deal with compliance. You may be decentralized. You might want to think about your overall structure for how you're going to make sure the funding you're bringing in is being managed in a compliant way, instead of just having it off in each department where someone's handling it. If there's turnover, these things all raise concerns about making sure you're meeting all of the requirements of that federal funding. So that one, I know I didn't really give a great answer. There is no set answer, but it's really looking at what you have. If you're a transit agency, does it make sense to have this lie with the finance department? I don't know. But if you're a transit agency getting certain types of funding, gather the people that have a role in this compliance and start building your requirements and your plans. I do know a lot of this starts at the people that handle your audits and your reviews. I know when I was a grant administrator, I was very aware of compliance. I've served as a compliance person at an agency. So look around, see who you have, and just start those discussions. And then someone asked, what is Title VI civil rights compliance and how do we ensure we're compliant? And what are the requirements of staying compliant? And hopefully through the course of this discussion, we've been able to highlight some of those answers to what you need to do. The Title VI self-assessment also, and the starting point number one is to look at your federal funders and really start collecting what it is that you need to look at to make sure you're compliant. Let's see. Okay. And that's all that I had in terms of what was submitted earlier. And now bear with me, I will try to go through the chat. And this information will be emailed after the webinar. How does this information apply to faith-based organizations, educational organizations? I cannot stress enough, when you receive federal funding, you want to definitely look at your agreement. You want to look at what your federal agency guidance is provided and make sure that, you look and see what your requirements are, because if you're receiving federal funding, you'll need to make sure you're being compliant. You're in compliance with the agreements that the federal government puts forward, and someone at your organization, will sign off on that agreement. So, okay, let's see. Robin asked, what are the new updates that need to be added to our latest approved Title VI? So, Robin, that's a hard one to answer. I don't know if you want to, Kayla, if you can put Robin on the mic so you could give me a little bit more information about that question. Robin, if you're comfortable doing that, I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
So I'm with the transit agency for our city. So we do have a Title VI plan that we've been using for the last couple of years, and it's been approved. So I was just wondering, what do we need to add to the existing plan? Are there any updates or?
Well, have you had a visit by your federal partner?
No, oh no, we haven't.
Okay, so have you given, well, and I know there's some circular updates, but as long as what I would say is what I did when I had my Title VI program to write, I went through that circular. So are you talking Federal Transit Administration funding?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you get Federal Highway Administration funding?
I believe so. That would be Public Works. I'm working with.
Just talking to one another. That is key. But it is one DOT, but there are differences. When I referenced the one once every 3 years where you do a Title VI plan, FTA, Federal Highways requires, annual updates, and they're different, but you've got the basics, right? You are required to do public participation in both. One just might require a different form, right? You've got one complaint process. So the starting point is having those discussions. If Public Works is handling that, the Federal Highways part, you want to bring the FTA part together and go through the guidance and the circulars. If you've already got a plan, that's wonderful. And look at them side by side to see maybe there are some, policies and procedures in one that you might not, and I don't know about your organization, but I know that sometimes you're really hyper focused and specific on what one funder requires, but that's that whole information that you might already have. So really read your circulars. If you already have a plan, you could ask other colleagues that are doing, transit service, hey, what are you doing? What are the changes? But just keep updated on your federal partner websites.
Great, thank you.
Anything else, or was that?
That was it. That was it. Thank you so much.
All right, well, you've got a good start. So congratulations on that. Now I'm looking, let's see, I think I covered this earlier, but can you provide information about the scope of Title VI requirements? If we receive federal funding for a specific project, does our entire organization, all activities have to comply with Title VI? Okay, let me start with that. This is such, trying to keep it high level, but that is the programs or activities slide. You want to look into that because the Civil Rights Restoration Act I think 1990. Don't quote me on that. But what that did is it really said, let's look at your programs and activities. Let's say you're funding a road, right? Your agency has money from federal highways, and it's not that Title VI just applies to your roads and people that utilize those roads. You're getting federal funding, so this applies to your programs and services. There are nuances when this gets to the state level. What I will say is collect your people. When I was doing this, I raised these questions and we had a lot of discussions about what that meant for the agency. So that's Civil Rights Restoration Act is a good place to start. Department of Justice has good information around that, and there is information out there. Let's see, the second part of your question, does Title VI apply to activities and processes involving the public or to internal activities and processes as well? So Title VI applies to your public. If you get a Title VI complaint, oftentimes what I would tell people, and this isn't 100%, but I don't know if you're getting into the equal employment opportunity. So I would say really generic. EEO applies to your staff. Title VI is to the programs and services, so to the community you're serving. That's not always 100% because if you're dealing with contracting and things, I mean, you get into, there could be an EEO complaint, Title VI, it's just general rule of thumb. Title VI applies to your programs and services, and your EEO applies to your employees. And if there's more questions on that, if I didn't quite understand, please do raise your hand and get the mic feature going. Give a moment. Oh, okay, Yolanda. I'm wondering the same thing. What exactly needs to be incorporated into an existing plan? If there's no plan available, do you have a sample plan to share with us? As a person that received federal funding, I knew when I would call and ask for an example of anything, a facility equity analysis or anything. It's just the plan. It's very hard to come by examples from our federal funders. Looking to what your counterparts are doing is always great. I learned a lot from other grant administrators, other Title VI civil rights practitioners. It is such a confusing topic. And the reason that I advise, look to your federal funders, it's because I would like to say that every agency got together and they hatched a plan and they said, hey, if you want to be compliant with Title VI, here's what you do. But that is not the case. And I don't want to get into the weeds, but I've been in the weeds. Demetra and I have been in the weeds of this, where we scratched our heads and thought, something's not adding up. But when you look at Title VI and each agency at its discretion will have different elements. FTA says, Federal Transit Administration says, every 3 years you need to do a Title VI plan, and it needs to look at where your buses and trains, like who they're serving, down to, do you have trash cans in what neighborhood? I mean, really detailed. And that's different than what federal highways requires. And that's different than what Treasury requires and Health and Human Services. So you want to look at your funders and really look at, and so you could be in a situation where you're getting funding from multiple sources. And then the question is, what do we do here? You're putting your best effort forward. You're talking to staff. You're looking at, hey, do we have a public participation plan? Do we have it written down? That's a start. As someone who's been on the other side of an audit, you want to see, and on either side of the audit, you want to demonstrate that you're trying to do what you need to do. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what that is, and you go on your best your best information provided. I wish I could give you a one size fits all. I can't. The thing that we're providing is the self-assessment checklist, which really looks at the key areas that you want to consider. But then considering if you've got these different types of funders that want a little bit more information, you need to develop a plan to include that. But it shouldn't be that you have one plan for one agency. You have to be reasonable of your time and your efforts. And that's where really working together, doing your self-assessment. And I've leaned on in my past life so many of my colleagues where we would just scratch our heads and say, okay, what are we going to do here? And we, put our best foot forward with the intent of being compliant. Okay, I see the link to the FHWA toolkit. I'm guessing this is the same plan. There's a lot of information. Federal Highways is pretty specific, and oftentimes the state will be, acting as the direct recipient and then requiring entities to provide information. So if you're a direct recipient, look to FHWA. If you have questions, specifically look to the entity that's passing funding through to you. Oh, and someone's asking for the slides in the chat, which I think everyone will have access to this available on the OPR site, Amy, correct? Okay. And then that's for the written questions. If I missed anything, let me know, team. And then if there's hands raised.
Mitzi, you haven't missed anything else in the chat, but there is a question or someone with their hand raised.
Okay.
Mark.
Unmute. Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Roost with Sustainable Energy Inc. And we are developing the breakthrough batteries and solar thin film and wind turbines and a variety of other technologies to enable getting rid of carbon, and want to use these to actually change the balance of power in society. And in the same direction you're headed in there. And so I had questions like, okay, there was an environmentalist who had been a coal miner so he gave a presentation on just how bad it was economically there, and I asked him, well, would it be good to bring in solar and renewable battery to provide electricity for these communities? He was really excited about it. There's other things like Jackson, where the city, where the state is fighting with this progressive minority-run community, city. Is in a hostile political environment to your work. Can we go in and exceed, let's say we exceed the 40%? Could we actually have a problem if we want to put a factory in or connect directly to a minority community or a cluster of them in Los Angeles, for example, and actually favor one way or another getting minority people upgraded in their skills and into the workforce, rather than just taking the people who have more skills because they've had more access to jobs in the past, for example. You see where I'm going with that?
Well, I hear a lot of things, and I want to make sure I might have you distill the question down. I hear you talking about workforce development, clean energy, but could you rephrase the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are a few fundamental things we're going to be doing that affect communities. One of them is building factories. Another is supporting creation of cooperatives to convert vehicles, in addition to the existing mechanics in a region, but to accelerate the process of converting vehicles from gasoline or diesel to full battery electric. I'm definitely thinking putting those into minority communities. I was following the Recovery Act stuff and wanted to, we weren't ready, but I was planning to join in on that. And so I figured there's probably a difference between states like California and states like Mississippi or Texas or Georgia or places like that, where I personally would have an interest in just totally flipping the economic order.
So I'm going to give you the federal funding cap perspective. There are two sides to every, where we think we may be doing good. If you're getting, and I know that was the question about building factories, right there, are you federally funded? That right there is
IRA. Yeah, I'm expecting to get $45 a kilowatt hour. I don't know whether it'll come to us or to our customers, but we're expecting to get $45 a kilowatt hour for our batteries because they'll be made with materials from North America in US factories.
Okay, well, my point is, anytime you're doing anything about building factories, you have to go through the environmental process. You've got NEPA, you've got in California, CEQA, there are considerations. Title VI, environmental justice, you want to make sure that what is going into a community is benefits, does not impact the community in a negative way. And that's where that public engagement piece is huge. Anytime you're doing an environmental project, an infrastructure turning of dirt, you need to look at a variety of aspects that heavily rely on public involvement and input. So I know I'm taking it back quite a few steps, but the one thing I will say is all of that, looking at the funding that's available, there's a lot of, climate, clean energy, workforce development is huge, trying to say that we're doing these things and we want to train and educate our workers in community to work in the community. But, when I hear factories and whatnot, it's just going back to step one. Like it's a process. You go through the Title VI covers, environmental justice covers that. Even though, for instance, a transportation facility was included in a neighborhood, and everyone thought, I'm making this up, but there was a lawsuit as well. But everyone thought that's a great location, but they failed to talk to the community that couldn't actually access it. And so it's just, taking a step back. And that's why you've got, if you're federally funded, you want to look at, or you want to pursue federal funding, you want to make sure that your planning starts square one and, build that equity strategy and then use that as you're looking for funding.
Yeah. Is there, the one specific question is there a problem? Let's say I want to go into a segregated society, a segregated community, or a segregated region, and put the resources into the minority community instead of into the white community.
That's where NEPA comes into play, and it's like a whole other training session. That is why the federal government has Title VI, equitable engagement, to make sure that the planning process is informed, the public is consulted with, and potential issues or benefits come to light when you're determining decision making. So, and I know that we could go on about that for a long time because that's a great question and it's an important topic, but I recognize we have 1 minute left. So Amy.
Yeah. Are you guys available for that kind of consultation?
You can send inquiries to Widow O'Brien's. We've got on our website, we have information, or you could reach out to one of us.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we are at our time. So thanks so much for your attendance today. Thanks for all of the questions. And, this really was the beginning to this topic. It's very deep, a lot of information out there. We will be sending some information afterwards, including a survey we hope you all take, as well as this Title VI self-assessment tool. I think that will be really useful for everyone to help answer some of these questions, along with the slides, especially that slide that talked about the other resources. A ton of information to explore there with other agencies, including the California Civil Rights Department, the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA. They have a ton of resources as well, templates and other things like that to really help you get things started with those easy toolkits. And again, we really hope to see you at our future webinars. We'll be hosting 3 more throughout the month of March, every Tuesday at noon. So you can see them listed here. And again, thanks so much for attending and hope to see you in the future. Thank you all.